Hi everyone and welcome to Noisebusters. I'd like to say a huge thanks to everyone who's supported the show so far. We're really enjoying making the episodes, and it seems that people are enjoying the show, engaging with it, and just kind of coming back every time. So that's more than we expected, so that's fantastic. It's been brutally cold here, George, in Calgary. Like minus 35 degrees this week, which is a bit too cold to do anything. But I'd see how you were getting on in Old Blighty.
Good. It's been 10 degrees this week, so it's been nice and toasty.
Yeah, it's warming up a bit now. But amazing thing happened this week for the first time ever. I was doing, maybe you've done it yourself, is like these pub quiz that you do online, like Skype, Zoom quiz things. And there's a local brewery that does one. And normally I'm sat there not really knowing a huge amount. I'm all right on the music rounds. But then I'm always like, well, my speciality is acoustics, and it never comes up. And then this week there was 4 or 5 questions around acoustics and like sound engineering and stuff. So I was like, I was in my element.
You got 2 of them.
Believe it. I got half of them right. So it was nice. It was nice to get at least one question right this time.
And I don't think you can go past the fact that we've both turned up wearing the same shirt.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. This isn't like a new uniform or costume. We've not had any like third party recommend that we wear the same outfits.
We're sponsored by denim shirts.
George has gone for like a white shirt underneath. I don't know what that's about.
It's because it's cold.
I thought you said it was warm.
10 degrees, relatively.
Today's guest started out as a research scientist at the Georgia Tech Research Institute. After completing his Bachelor of Science in Physics and a Master in Science in Electrical Engineering at Georgia Tech, where he had the honour of studying under Dr. Eugene Patronis and the late Dr. Marshall Leach. He then actually took over as the owner and CEO of the world's largest loudspeaker manufacturing company from his father. This loudspeaker company is Eminence, and Eminence has grown hugely over the years and is a purely family-oriented business with also a significant aspect of them. They're basically a big world player in loudspeaker design, manufacturing, distributing to over 90 countries, which is quite a task. Eminence is now 50 years old and still going strong. So we're very pleased to welcome Rob Gault to the show. Hi, Rob. How you doing?
I'm good, Dan. How are you?
Not bad, not bad. How are you over there in Kentucky?
It's been cold here as well. We've had like a 2-week cold snap, and it's finally starting to warm up. And this weekend we're supposed to get above freezing and stay there for a few days. So looking forward to that.
Texas has been struggling a lot, like power outages and all sorts of stuff going on down there.
We've had like 3 winter storms in a row, all going through Texas and coming up through Kentucky and up to New England, so we're ready for spring.
I think it'd be nice to dive a little bit into your background and really find out a little bit about your professional background and talk a bit about the early days of your career and kind of how you got interested in sound, because that's something that's been a big part of your career so far, and it'd be nice to dig into the kind of whys and hows, and I imagine it's quite a convoluted story, but we're here to listen. So,
well, let's see, my dad had started Eminence in 1966. I was like 6 years old. And between the school and my house, the school that I was going to as a, like second grader, the factory was along that route. And I used to pop in there in the afternoons after school and bump some change off Dad to get some snacks or something on the way home. And, just hanging out in the speaker factory, running around. Back in those days, there was not much industrial safety programs or anything, so little kids running around the factory was not a problem. So I kind of grew up in the speaker factory. Dad used to sometimes do science experiments with me. We'd make gunpowder and burn it on the floor of the tool room in the factory and stuff like that. So just spent a lot of time out there. And then when I got to high school, I started working there in the summers, just on the assembly line, putting speakers together. And then I decided I wanted, I always knew I wanted to get a degree, a college degree, and my dad had studied physics, and it seemed like he knew everything that he needed to know to run the factory and to build speakers and design them and so forth. So I decided I would go for a physics degree, and I applied to about 6 different schools, and 5 of them were up north. And I went up to Rochester to Institute of Technology there for a like weekend introduction thing they offered. And it was snowing horizontally all weekend, and about 50-mile-an-hour blowing snow, and I decided this is not for me. So I had applied to one school down south, and that was Georgia Tech. So I went down there, and it was a good school. I mean, they pushed the students pretty hard, I think, and it wasn't an easy education, but it was fun. I enjoyed the whole thing, and I always liked learning, so didn't mind the challenge. And then after college, I went back for my master's, worked for Georgia Tech, so they paid for my master's, which was nice. And then I'd always planned to go back to work for Dad, and one day in about, I think it was 1986, he gave me a call and said, "Are you still interested in coming to work for me?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, now would be a good time." So I gave my notice and headed back to Eminence, and started there in the sales department initially for a couple of years, I guess. I got to meet all the customers, get to know them well, and then moved into manufacturing and learned everything I could from Dad. And then about 1993 or thereabouts, he decided he was going to retire and do some traveling, and he just suddenly retired and was not around anymore. And I'd ask him questions, I'd try to pick his brain, but he's like, "You guys know what you're doing now, so you can figure it out." So we were kind of on our own. But at that time, the company was rolling pretty good. We were doing in the mid 90s, we were doing 6,000-7,000 speakers a day, and business was just coming in as fast as we could handle it. So it was pretty easy start.
What specifically enticed you about the kind of sound elements of speaker design? Was it just that you'd been engulfed in it as a young kid, and it was just part of you, or like what was?
Yeah, I think
why
so.
sound? I guess, and why speakers?
The music that was out when I was a kid was, I thought was. I guess every generation thinks the music that's out when they're young is the best music of all time, but Allman Brothers and, all that kind of music was just, I loved it. I couldn't play anything, but I loved the music, and we were Eminence was serving that industry, that market. So that was interesting, and of course there's a science and engineering aspect to it too, which I had always loved science and engineering. So just seemed like a great fit, and an opportunity for a career was there if I just wanted it. Dad wanted me to try something else, work for somebody else first, and make sure that you really want to do this. He didn't want me to feel like I had been trapped into a family business or something. So I worked for Georgia Tech for a few years, and that was enough to satisfy that requirement, and was able to come back to my dream job.
You mentioned that you could never play anything, but were you ever musically inclined at all? Did that pass through you at all?
I took piano lessons when I was a kid, and I played trombone in high school. Not the kind of, and the piano lessons were all like classical music, and I just didn't want to, wasn't that interested in that. I'm much more interested in classical music today than I was when I was a teenager. But today I like, any kind of music that sounds like it would take a lot of talent to compose and to play on any instrument, especially guitar, though. I love guitar, and sometimes the things that artists can do on a guitar are just mind-boggling, really, that they can do that, and they do it and make it look easy. So I'm still fascinated by that, but I can't do it. It takes a lot of investment and time, and I haven't done that. So
it does. You give up the best part of yourself, I think, when you learn guitar, being a guitar player.
Yeah, you're a player, right?
Yeah, I play. Yeah, it's. I like it. I'm kind of similar. Like, I was into music, and I was more of a player, I guess, rather than like yourself. But it was definitely a part of that intrigued me in sound and acoustics, and being surrounded by that as a kid definitely inspired me to be more interested in that side of things. So I guess being like the CEO of such a big company in the loudspeaker market, like what was that like? I know you touched on it initially, but in your previous response, but like maybe more specific as we kind of go through the years of being a CEO. What were the kind of things that you went through?
The fact that the company was doing well was, comforting. It made difficult decisions a lot easier to make when we were, running financially very well. And my dad, aside from teaching me production process control and all that, he also, taught me his business philosophy was basically always do the right thing. Basically just do the right thing. Kind of like the golden rule in the Bible. It was the all-encompassing base foundation rule for running a business. Just do the right thing. Stand behind the product. Treat customers fair. Treat suppliers fair. Treat employees fair. And so that makes it pretty easy to make a lot of decisions that you have, even if they're difficult decisions, like if we had a quality problem and a customer needs to be taken care of, so you do what you have to do no matter what the cost of it is. And then what I learned was when you do that, the customer respects you more and you end up getting more business. So there were occasions where we had a quality problem, and after it was all over with, it seemed like we were better off for having had the quality problem than for if we hadn't had it at all. Like once Fender, we made a bunch of speakers for Fender that had paper bobbins. A lot of guitar speakers will have a paper bobbin so that there's acoustic reasons why that, gives it a sound that's good for guitar. And we hadn't cured the coils long enough at the right temperature to fully cure the adhesive. So when you played them at low power, they were fine. But if you played them at a little bit higher power and warmed up that adhesive, it hadn't cured and cross-linked, so it would soften up and the coil would shuck right off the bobbin. And we discovered this. I can't remember the details, but I think we discovered it before Fender even discovered it. And we called them immediately and said, look, we want to recall that batch of speakers, and explained the problem, and then replaced them. And it was a pretty large batch. So then I went to a Winter NAMM show shortly thereafter and met Bill Schultz, who was running Fender at the time. And I started apologizing for this problem we'd had, and he just interrupted me and says, no, it's not the problem that we had, it's the way you guys responded to it. And so, I walked away from that feeling like, wow, it's a really good thing that we had that screw up, Now they think we're even better.
So, Rob, you mentioned that your dad decided that he wanted to go traveling, and then it was sort of next day you were CEO, mm-hmm. which is a role that not many people will take on, particularly for a company like Eminence. Is how did it feel initially when you took that role on?
I had seen him, I was actually sharing an office with him for several years there, and so I had watched him doing what he did. And Dad was a little bit of a benevolent dictator. He was really smart and always knew, had a lot of confidence in his decisions, a lot more than I would ever have. But I saw how he ran the business, and the only thing that I thought I would do different from him was not try to make all the decisions myself, because I could see that it had gotten too big for one guy to do that. And as I told myself, I'll never do that, but I did, in fact, over the years, kind of fell into the same mistake, I think, because maybe I was picky and wasn't satisfied with some of the solutions that people I delegated jobs to did, so I kind of just grabbed them and did them myself all too often. And that's a mistake. You really need to spend your time fostering the team and building the team and coaching the team, not making all the decisions yourself. So it took me a long time to realize that mistake, but I wasn't feeling super pressured or anything when I first took over as CEO. I knew all the customers. they felt like friends, at the time. So it was a, a matter of fact, I can't complain about any part of my life from beginning to now. It's all been a happy experience and a fun ride. So.
And it started, like 50 years ago? And it started off small with just a few speakers a day. And now I think on the website it says it's 10,000 speakers a day. What was the process? How did that evolve? How did you go from this small company to this huge?
My dad had been working for Magnavox. I think he started working for Magnavox in about 1956 or something like that. And they had a speaker factory down in Paducah, Kentucky, but he wasn't there. He was in Fort Wayne. And I think he was actually working, like a microwave division or something. And but they had this speaker factory down in Paducah, and they had some labor issues there, some strikes and stuff that were going on. So they decided to shut it down. I think it was about 1962. They shut the factory down. And then a year or two later, they reached a deal with a company called CTS, who used to be the, primary supplier of speakers to U.S. Based speaker. The former, before Eminence. At one time, Eminence supplied everybody, but before that, it was CTS. And so they reached a deal to sell the factory in Paducah to CTS, and part of the deal was they were going to loan some of the managers to restart the factory and operate it for a while until CTS was ready to take over. So Dad and several of the co-workers there at Magnavox commuted back and forth between Fort Wayne and Paducah, which I don't know what that is, probably about a 4 or 5 hour drive weekly. And after about 6 months of that, CTS offered him and several other guys, full-time positions there. So he took over as, I don't know what his official title was, but basically he was chief engineer at that factory. And that factory was pretty vertically integrated. They made their own baskets and cones and voice coils and I don't know what, plates for the magnet structures and that kind of thing. So he was very familiar with not only the parts that most speaker manufacturers make, but the parts that they buy as well and how they were made. And he was just a natural when it came to production. He could look at got to make this part. He could figure out pretty quickly how to make it cost effectively and consistently as simple as possible. That was his real contribution, I think. To and so when he started the factory in Kentucky, I think it was a little bitty place, like 3,000 square feet or something like that, and he built all the equipment himself, got it up and running, and he knew he could get a lot of business from Magnavox because of his relationship with them, and picked Eminence kind of because of it. It was geographically located between close to Magnavox and some suppliers and other potential customers that he knew about. So started out pretty small, but I think within about 2 or 3 years, they were making around 3,000 speakers a day in that little bitty place. And 3,000 speakers a day for one assembly line was a good number. We don't do that today on one assembly line. They might have had a few more people on that assembly line. The speakers might have been a little simpler, but it was pretty good. And so about 6 years later, about around 1972, he built a larger facility across on the other side of town and moved over there. And business, because of his relationship with engineering departments at a lot of potential customers, just kept coming in. And I think he was, because of his production engineering skills, we were able to produce at prices that were beating CTS's prices. So we were just gaining business rapidly. And so by the time, Actually, there was a slow period after that, but while I was in college, they went through a little bit of I think it was an economic situation in America, and the speaker business was slow, and they were working kind of off a week and on a week. But by the time I got back or started there full time, the economy had improved, and some of our competitors were financially injured by that slow period, had borrowed too much or whatever, and we were conservative during that period, so we came out of it in good shape. And just from the mid 80s to 2000 or so, we were just picking up business. We basically could have taken on more if we felt we could swallow it fast enough, but to 15-20% growth a year was enough, we thought, to manage, and it just kept growing like that.
You've massively ramped up production. But I suppose how have you ensured that Eminence has remained relevant throughout the years, I suppose?
We've still only supplied a few markets, in speakers. We don't, predominantly right now we do pro sound kind of speakers, musical instrument speakers, and we do some hi-fi, some what I would call the crazy car speaker, car aftermarket. We haven't really diversified into a lot of other products. For quite a while there, we did some products that are what I would call tactile transducers. They're one customer of ours was Hammer, and they make a product called a butt kicker. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but they mount. You can mount them to theater chairs or home theater couch, whatever. And when the dinosaurs come in Jurassic Park, you can feel them coming. So it's just an extremely low frequency transducer, and we did some of them. But we've kind of stayed in our own niche, which is pro sound and musical instrument largely. And then in the car aftermarket, when a lot of those speakers were being made in America, and most of them are made in China now, but when a lot of them were being made in America, we picked up a lot of that business. It got to be a third of our production for several years between the mid '80s and the end of the '90s. And but it's really just keeping up with the materials, the improvements. The speaker basic design of a moving coil loudspeaker hasn't changed much since it was invented 100 plus years ago. But the materials, the magnet strength is so much stronger. Neomagnets are very light and very strong, scary strong, and cone materials, are much stronger and lighter. Voice coil adhesives can handle a lot more temperature. Bobbin materials can handle more temperature, so you can pump more power into a speaker, and it can handle it and without falling apart or even without distortion to a high degree, high power level. So that's where most of the innovation has been. And honestly, I don't know that there's going to be any significant change in the basic design of a speaker for quite some time, because you got to move air, and a moving coil loudspeaker is I won't say it's an efficient way to do it, because they're not terribly efficient. If you got, maybe 10% efficiency would be a theoretical limit for a moving coil loudspeaker, but there's no more efficient way to do it that I'm aware of, and there obviously isn't yet, or they would have taken over. Moving coil loudspeakers would not be the thing they are.
So how's the R&D side of the business? What does it look like? Is it like a separate entity, or is it just kind of evolved over the years? What does it look like in Eminence, the actual division of that?
Yeah, it's a department within Eminence, and typically there's two things that they do in the R&D department at Eminence. One is satisfy customer sample requests. If we've got OEM customers that, let's say Fender wants a new guitar speaker, they'll contact the engineers and tell them the basic parameters that they want, obviously the size and the impedance, and something about the sound characteristics that they want out of it. They might be like, this other model that we make for them, except they want it a little brighter or something, however they want to communicate that. So that's one big set of the business. And the other is basically designing products on speculation for a distribution market. Music stores handle both musical instrument speakers and pro sound speakers for their, the house sound. And so we'll design speakers. For example, a couple of years ago, we came out with our first 21-inch speaker, and we weren't the first people to make a 21-inch woofer, but I really think that the 21-inch woofer we came up with is the best one in the world right now. There's a thing called volume displacement in loudspeakers that measures basically the total volume displacement that speaker can produce, and it's the largest of any speaker I know of in the world. So when it comes to just pushing a lot of air for high power bass reproduction, it's kind of the master right now. So we do that kind of thing, and then that and satisfying customer requests.
Some of our listeners are interested in getting into the field of like acoustics and R&D, and so what do you look for in terms of people that might work in that division of Eminence, or a speaker company in general, I guess?
An engineering degree would be good. I took my bachelor's in physics, and when I finished my physics degree, I realized, I know a lot about the background of everything physical. Physics teaches you about the fundamentals of everything physical, but doesn't tell you how to do much practical. So in engineering, I said, when I get done with this bachelor's degree, I got to get an engineering degree so I know what to actually do something with all this knowledge. Electrical engineering or mechanical engineering, material science, those kind of backgrounds would be excellent for speaker design, and likewise for enclosure design, and if you're an electrical engineer, amplifier design and so forth, all the audio things. So we've got people with mechanical engineering degrees that are working in speaker design in R&D. Musical instruments are a little bit different. Most of the guys we've had in musical instrument speaker design are players, guitar players, bass or lead, and typically, I guess they have good ears, not because their ears are, more accurate, but because they've spent their life listening carefully, because it's their passion. Mm-hmm. And so they hear things in a guitar speaker that an engineer might not hear or care about. And a lot about musical instrument design musical instrument speaker design is an art more than a science. I mean, there is some science involved in it, but mixing and matching the different parts that you've got to work with to give you the sound that you want, or to take the sound that this speaker has and figure out how you would have to adjust it to give you, what you want. It's kind of an art, and it really just takes a lot of experience. And so a lot of those guys that we've had doing musical instrument speaker design didn't have engineering background so much as they had several years of building samples for other engineers, and then kind of figuring out, what it takes to do that tweaking and get the sound that they want. And they also have to be able to speak the language that guitar players speak. When they say, well, I want one that's got more crunch or something. Well, you got to know what they mean when they say crunch. And some of those guys, they understand exactly what they're looking for and how to do it in a speaker. And that's not something an engineer, you don't learn that at Georgia Tech. What does crunch, how do you get crunch in your guitar speaker?
When you're manufacturing speakers, especially for different markets like pro sound, guitar, they all have different requirements. And like, say if you're sending things overseas to be made to be manufactured. How has that process been for getting the manufacturer that you're working with to understand how to make certain types of speakers certain ways? And have you had difficulties through that process?
Yeah, one thing I can remember specifically about when you asked about sending speakers overseas, in around 2000, late 1990s anyway, a lot of the crazy car speaker market started to move their manufacturing over to China, and we didn't mind that terribly because they were traditionally not a very good paying customer. That group of customers was poor pay and high maintenance, and so we thought, kind of good riddance, let them go to China to get these crazy speakers that they want, new designs every 6 months and so forth. High labor intensive, product too. But shortly after that, we started noticing some of our North American OEM, pro sound and musical instrument customers that were our real historical base, doing the same thing. They were shutting down production in North America, their own production, and finding contract manufacturers in China. So our first thought was we need to find a partner in China that can build speakers for us, and we know the big players, so maybe we can capture the business over there and feed it to our partner. So I started making trips to China and searching for them, and I went to literally hundreds of different speaker factories. There's thousands and thousands of them in China. It's amazing. But they didn't really, most of them didn't seem to understand anything other than that they're taking these parts like a cone and a coil and a magnet and plates and a frame and gluing them together. They didn't know how to choose the right parts to make a speaker that you want. And guitar speakers are a great example of that, because a guitar speaker produces a lot of distortion because it's supposed to. A guitar speaker is as much a part of the instrument as the violin body is on a Stradivarius violin. It's creating a lot of distortion, and that's what's the difference. The string itself might vibrate in a pure tone, but it excites all these harmonics in the wood, and the shape of the wood's important, the thickness of the wood, the type of wood. All these things are important to give it the harmonic content that makes it sound pretty. If it was just a bunch of sine waves, I don't think we'd be listening to a lot of music. It'd be kind of boring, right? Guitar.
It's the only pure way to listen to music, I think.
Yeah, lead guitar, has got all kinds of distortion in it, and a bunch of that comes from the speaker. And you got to put the right parts together to get the distortion you want. You can make a speaker that distorts, much worse. It's not going to sound good. You have to know it's got to get the right distortion. So we, when we were trying to find a partner in China, we decided we'll send them guitar speakers, because guitar speakers are notoriously hard to match. If you want to match, a Celestion Vintage 30 speaker and get the same sound of it, it's not easy to do. Very difficult, especially to a discerning guitar player. They're going to hear every little difference. So we started sending guitar speakers over there, and some of them would send back things that were like a hi-fi woofer with a foam edge and thick bodies and all this, and tell us, well, we fixed your distortion problem in the speaker that you sent us. This is much better speaker. So they just didn't get it. Eventually, we decided to start our own factory, because we could see we know what we're doing. They don't necessarily know what we're doing, and if we found a partner, eventually we'd just be a middleman anyway. So we decided in 2006 we started our own factory over there, and spent a lot of time, in preparation and going back over there, getting it going good, training the people. And from the beginning, we tried to treat our employees there like we do in Kentucky, like a family. We really care about the employees, and people would tell us, including my partner at the time in that factory. We had a partner from Taiwan, and he's like, "This is ridiculous. You can't, the Chinese people won't understand that. They're not used to a factory owner, working on the line with them if they want to, or things like that. Fix a machine, don't do that. It's not appropriate in China. So, but eventually we did manage to do that, and I'm proud of that. And I give a lot of credit to the management that we've got in the factory over there now, who believed that we could do that. But teaching them to understand why a guitar speaker is distorted in a particular way, it just takes a lot of time. Giving them examples. The Western music's not that popular in China, so they've got a lot. You hear the Chinese instruments. It's not like lead guitar or anything. They had to learn it, but you give them enough time and attention, and they eventually get it. So China really has changed a lot in the last 10 years. It's they have come a long way. Not just our factory there, but all the Chinese speaker factories are much better than they were 15 years ago. They're becoming just like it happened in Japan, I guess, with automotive manufacture. There used to be junk, right? Everybody thought everything that came from Japan was junk, and now it's very high quality stuff. Well, China's moving in the same way, becoming very difficult to compete with.
Is that your fault then, Rob, for making them so good?
No, it's our customers' fault. We wanted to keep building speakers in Kentucky, and we have been able to do that. But it was, it's the market. The market's always going to be driven to lower cost. Nobody wants to pay more for something if they can get it for less. The challenge, I guess, is to keep the quality up, and while you're trying to drive the cost down. And we saw some of our customers, unfortunately, sell to, the brand owner, like that founded the company, sells it to some investment group who is really just a bunch of accountants. And when I was a kid, all the customers that we had seemed like they were like usually failed musicians, or not failed musicians, but musicians who weren't going to make a really big living as a musician, but they liked, repairing amps and that kind of thing. So they said, I can make my own. People like Hartley Peavy, he wanted to play, but wasn't good enough, but he knew how to fix amps and stuff. So eventually he just made his own company, and it grew like gangbusters. So, but then it's kind of changed over the years. A lot of those guys have sold, not Hartley, thank goodness, he's still got his own company, but some of the others have sold off to these investment groups who just care about the dollar. And I've seen them kind of ruin some great brands just trying to get as much money as they can out of it, and not really having a passion for the music anymore.
Well, people notice, don't they? Like the customers start to notice that.
They definitely do, yeah.
Deteriorate, and the customers just don't buy them anymore. So, yeah. It's a shame when that happens.
It is.
Kudos to Eminence for not doing. When you're designing speakers, testing must be a huge part of that process, and you make some enormous monsters. You just said about the 21-inch beast. So, what's that been like, dealing with more of the environmental aspects of the sound that you generate during that testing process? You must have some serious facilities to do that testing. And
yeah, well, you always have an anechoic chamber so that you can point the speaker into this chamber, and what it represents is an infinite space. The anechoic chamber is there to absorb all the sound that the speaker is putting out, so that it's not reflecting back, and reverberating in that space. So you can kind of measure the speaker by itself without the room effects. So we've got anechoic chambers. There's a company called Klippel, Wolfgang Klippel in Germany, has made a really amazing instrument, distortion analyzer, that not only you can basically put a microphone right close to the speaker in the near field, and play particular tones through it, and it measures the distortion, and it also kind of miraculously tells you where the source of the distortion is. And it's, things like nonlinearity in the magnetic field, or the suspension, the compliance is nonlinear, maybe asymmetric, pulls in more on the outstroke than it does on the downstroke, that kind of thing. It's a pretty remarkable machine, and it helps especially if you're designing a professional sound reinforcement speaker, and the goal is minimum distortion at high power. That distortion analyzer has been a real plus, and I guess they've been around for probably, time flies, 15 or 20 years now, but they're becoming pretty commonplace. A lot of people have them. Power test facility is another thing that you have to have, because a lot of the speakers nowadays are put in some pretty demanding, like that 21-inch I'm talking about. I'll be honest with you, I'm not even sure what the continuous power handling is on that. I think it's like maybe 4,000 watts continuous, and that makes a lot of noise. So you've got, if you're going to test it like that for, maybe you're going to test it at level for 100 hours, you better have a place that's not going to disturb. You don't put it outside or your neighbors will come kill you. So recently we built we built a new power test facility within our factory, and it's basically a concrete bunker. Dense concrete will absorb a lot of that low frequency. It won't absorb it all, but keeps it to a level where you can tolerate it in the factory. And so kind of like a bomb, a bomb shelter or something. As a matter of fact, it's a great place to go if there's tornadoes in the area. That's one of our designated storm shelters, is go to the power test facility, because it's solid concrete and thick and heavy. So what else do we do with in the anechoic chamber? Of course, you measure some of the characteristics that are important to measure with all speakers is the amplitude versus frequency curve. We call it SPL curve, sound pressure level curve. That and the distortion and the impedance curve. So there's instruments commonplace now for measuring all those characteristics. And then there's a set of parameters that were first specified by a couple guys in Australia, Teal and Small. The Teal Small parameters help you to design cabinets that are appropriate for a particular speaker, or conversely, help you figure out what Teal Small parameters will be appropriate for a given cabinet.
Yeah, I recall the Teal and Small parameters. We'd covered it at university, and I remember Eminence created, it was like a little free bit of software that when you bought one of the speakers, me and my dad were making pro audio PA speakers, and we used that to design the box that it came in, and that was really cool. Like, that was, at the time, it was the only speaker manufacturer that was really giving that out for you to be more of a DIY creator. So that was really cool. What was that like, creating that, and what brought that around? That
was a product, we called it Eminence Designer, and it was actually software written by somebody named Harris. I think the company name was Harris Tech, and we just kind of, I don't know what you call that, white label or whatever, had them write a version, for us, and we populated it with a lot of the parameters for a lot of different Eminence speakers that were in our catalog, line, so that you could just select them and not have to enter all those parameters. So it's really good to have something like that. If you're a DIY guy and you want to build a cabinet, you need a program like that. Yeah, when that program came up, it was like, let's just try this, and they sounded great. Like, it was fantastic, and we could like test different speakers out and see what the dB curves look like, and it was fantastic to have that tool for free as well. It was quite cool. One thing that's on my mind when speaker manufacturers are now moving into the kind of impulse response scene, and like
using digital models of their speakers to go into, like, say, guitar plugins or whatever to represent and make them sound more realistic. So what's that side of the business been like? And was that just you felt Eminence had to do it because everyone else was doing it? Or, like, what do you see the benefits of impulse response?
I think Line 6, back in mid 80s, I think maybe they came up with the Axis 212 modeling amp, and I think that was the very first amp, and or the first modeling amp. I think it just had a specific set of cabinets that it modeled and speakers that it modeled, and you could then also apply some pedal, effects in the same software, but it wasn't general purpose like some of the modeling amps today. You can put any impulse response you want in there and basically take a signal straight from your guitar and convolute it with the impulse response and get the sound that you would have if you had that amp, mic'd that same way without having the amp, and then change to another amp on the next song if you want. So just a lot more versatile. I think it makes good sense. There are certain purists that are always going to want to have the real amp with the real speaker and everything there. But one of the things that's different about the speakers for a modeling amp is it's all the distortion that the speaker and everything else in the amplifier has produced is all modeled in digital signal processing, and you don't want the speaker again adding distortion like a guitar speaker, although that first Axis 212 cabinet was basically just a guitar speaker, and a whole lot of them that they make today are guitar speakers. But I think the right way to do that would be a flat response, full range speaker, at least as full range as any tone that the guitar amp is going to produce, any harmonic content, and so that it can faithfully reproduce the distorted signal that you're creating in the digital signal processing. Pretty neat idea, and I think it's going to
really be
popular for a long time.
What do you think makes a good speaker? Like, I know it has different audiences and stuff for different types, but, like, what do you think makes things good? Like, what do you go strive for?
That is a difficult question, and I can remember probably hundreds of times in my career at Eminence having a customer call. Usually this is a startup customer that's not, they think they're going to create the next greatest speaker, that the public's going to buy, and they'll call and say, I want the best speaker that you make. Well, that depends on what you want it for. A guitar speaker is entirely different from a pro sound speaker, and and if you're just looking at pro sound speakers, some are, cost is not a real factor. It's how much output can you make this speaker? How much sound pressure level can this speaker produce in this frequency range? Regardless of the cost, or maybe it's the other end of the spectrum where, we got, $15 we can put in the speaker, and we want as much output as we can get out of that. So it depends on what your goal is. I know sound like a cop-out answer, but it really depends so much on the application and, the goal of that application more than. You can't just say what's a great speaker, It's too hard to answer.
Yeah, I know. It kind of leads me on to the next question, which is, like, when you're mass producing speakers, how careful do you have to be, and what safeguards do you have to put in place? And do you throw a lot away initially when the company was growing, or is it, what was that like? How have you got to be such a big mass producing speaker?
We still throw away more than we'd like, but consistency is the most important thing. I think when you're mass producing speakers, you've got to be able to produce that speaker. If it's model, XYZ, you want to produce XYZ so that it's got the same SPL, same power handling, batch after batch after batch. And I think that's another place where the Chinese used to be horrible, and some of them probably still are horrible, and they've gotten a lot better. But that's probably maybe the single most difficult thing in the speaker business is figuring out how to make them consistently. And speaker cones are probably the single component that's most responsible for the sound that the speaker produces, and coils would be the second most important. And so cones, that's a bunch of black magic in itself too. The cone manufacturers, fortunately, have been doing it for, some of them at least, the ones that we use, have been doing it for a long time, and they know what it takes to get consistent results. And then we've got the instruments and the ears, in our factory to evaluate whether they're consistent. And depending on the speaker that it's going in and the history that we've had with that cone, we may take speakers cones when they arrive and actually build up a control reference speaker using a cone from that batch to evaluate it and make sure that it's close, because if it's not, you're going to make a whole bunch of speakers that the customer's not going to be happy with, and it'd be better to reject the cone batch than have them reject the batch of speakers. So cone, consistency is really critical, and for that reason, I don't think we use any cones that are manufactured in China. There's gobs of cone manufacturers there, and they might be good, but we just haven't got the level of confidence in them that it takes. So in America, there's, really only 3 cone factories left, and 2 of them are owned by the same guy, and they're about to merge into one facility, but he really knows what he's doing. The people that work there know what they're doing, and we're confident that he's going to be able to move production of the cones that come. It's funny that factory that I'm talking about that they're about to shut down is in the same building that the CTS factory was in Paducah, Kentucky, when my dad was at CTS, the same exact building. But they're going to move. That's Hawley Products, and they're going to move there. And they actually were the company that invented molded cones like 100 years ago. But they're going to move their facility and consolidate it at a Rapid Die and Molding up in Wisconsin, which is one of the other speaker manufacturer or cone factories that's left in America. And then the other one is Loudspeaker Components, which is a stone's throw away from RDM, Rapid Die, in Wisconsin. But those guys, all of them really know what they're doing. They've had paper engineers working for them, college degree, PhD paper engineers, material sciences that know how, what makes a difference in how you take these components or materials and turn them into a speaker cone, and how to get it consistent. And thank goodness that they do, because there's a lot of black magic there, and we don't make our own cones at Eminence. I kind of wanted to when we started our factory in Dongguan, because my father was still living and he knew a lot about cone manufacturing, and we had another engineer that worked for us that had worked at a cone factory and knew a lot about it. But I couldn't get my partner at the time interested in cone manufacturing, and after we had produced for 2 or 3 years there, we kind of missed our opportunity. We had an opportunity when we started, but because it's hard to match a cone, we already had a lot of cones in the tool, in the tool kit, so to speak, and it was a little late to start one then. But cones are real important. Coils, we do make our own coils, and coils are a lot easier to be consistent with, though, because the wire is made very consistently no matter where you get it. You can get really consistent wire material and dimensions. And if you wind the same number of turns with the same diameter wire and use the same adhesives and the same bobbin material, that you're winding it on, you can get very consistent coil results. And you get those two things together, get them right, and not a whole lot else that can go wrong sound-wise. Usually some kind of adhesive mistake.
So I think it's time to dive into a beer. I know you've been waiting for one, Rob, urgently. And
you got it.
It's my £4.50 beer, this. £4.50.
Wow. And what is it?
It is actually it's raspberry Berliner Weisse, which is brewed in Liverpool.
Oh.
And you guys can see it there.
Mm-hmm.
I know karate.
yeah, I know karate voodoo too, which I've not had before, which I'm looking forward to. What have you guys got?
I've got a Kolsch from Schlafly Breweries here somewhere in the United States. I'm not sure where it is, but that's a Kolsch variety of beer, which is real crisp and clean tasting. I kind of like IPAs usually, but and I've got some IPAs I'll probably get into later.
Yeah, that's why I've got a white IPA called the Electric Unicorn by Phillips Brewery.
I love this craft brewery revolution that we've got going on right now.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Look at the colour of this. It's like pink. Might get an umbrella in it. So, Rob, you're talking about you might get into the rest of your IPA later. I suppose the question is, what is the plan for the future? What?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll be 62 at the end of this year, and I already mentioned my mistake of trying to make too many decisions myself. So the last few years, I've been trying to back off, and went back when I was traveling back and forth from China like 6 times a year. Every other month, I was going to China for 2 to 4 weeks, and trying to manage both factories. And I thought I was going to go crazy for a while. So I think it was maybe 2009, somewhere along in there, I asked Chris Rose to become the president. That had been my title, and I said, "Why don't you be the president? You manage the Kentucky factory, and I'll keep running back and forth to China." And also, I decided at that time to take on compliance with environmental regulations, which are becoming a bigger thing all the time. When you're manufacturing, you've got to meet all these environmental regulations, and you've got to also worry about occupational hazards to your workers and stuff. And we didn't have anybody that was full-time in that at the time, so I kind of took that on and managing the Chinese factory. And we got into making cabinets over there too at the time, because some of our OEM customers that had found contract manufacturers in China weren't very happy with the quality of the products they were getting, and they said, "Why don't you guys make cabinets too?" So we contracted with a guy in where is he, in Malden, England, Straight Edge Manufacturing, Ian Wilson. He and his guys, what we did was we made a deal with them. You teach us how to build cabinets, and any business that you bring to the Dongguan factory, cabinet business, we will basically sell it to you at cost. And so they really did teach us how to build cabinets. I think matter of fact, I think Ian once said the cabinets that are coming out of our factory in China were every bit as good, if not better, than what they were making in their English factory. So he'll deny that if you mention it to him. But we make a very high quality cabinet. It's not the cheapest cabinet you can get, but it's really high quality. But I'm about 62 now, and Dad was maybe a year or two older than that, I think, before he decided he was going to, take some time off. So I think I'm looking maybe towards the end of the year to slow down and start doing a little more traveling with my wife while we're still both, healthy enough to get out and do things, play more golf, that kind of stuff. She picked up golf a few years ago, so we'd have something else to do, and going to do more of it. So.
Where are you gonna go to, Rob? I'm guessing it's not China.
Well, no. If I could go to China and do something other than work, I would, because there's lots of sightseeing to do there. I've only done that, twice really. I went to see the Great Wall briefly, and a town called Guilin, which is, you've ever seen the Chinese paintings with the mountains that go straight up and down? That's what that landscape looks like, and I got to go there, and that was really fantastic. And there's so many more places in China to see, but there's so many more places in America to see, or in North America. So I think we'll spend some time just tooling around the United States and see things we haven't seen. We've been living here our whole lives, and a lot of it we haven't seen. So I think everywhere in the world there's fantastic.
So is it the case of getting an RV and then driving across the states kind of thing?
Not an RV. We're more hotel people. We don't want to have to keep clean up our own room after.
Cleaning out.
Yeah, we're lazy travelers. Nice warm hotel and that kind of things. But there's everywhere that I've been in the world, and I've had the fortune to be to a lot of them. There's beautiful places everywhere. So. Anywhere I could go and see it and play golf there.
I was going to say, around the world, Kentucky's known pretty much for one thing. I don't know if you know this, Dan and I don't eat meat. Would we struggle to eat in Kentucky?
What vegetable do you eat in Kentucky? I don't know, asparagus, lettuce, tomatoes, that kind of thing.
Kentucky fried vegetables.
Both of you guys are vegetarian then?
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't do that. I would call myself a total carnivore, most of my life, but I'm an omnivore now, and I'm enjoying vegetables more, but I'm still a meat eater for sure. Now you said Kentucky's only known for one thing. Now, what would you say that is? Because I think there's two or three things.
Chicken.
Yeah, chicken is one of them. Yeah. What about bourbon? Bourbon makes.
Oh, that's true. Sorry.
And horse racing is, maybe it's not as famous in England as it is in America, but Kentucky's kind of known as a horse racing state here, and the Kentucky Derby and all that. Yeah. But those are the three things. After that, there's really not much. I tell you,
I'm trying to think if Liverpool's famous for anything other than the Beatles. I had some friends come stay, and I remember they came off the train, and in the station it was playing, I Want to Hold Your Hand or something, and they were like, "Oh, that's quaint." And then we were walking through the city centre, and all the shops were playing Beatles songs. And then we got on the ferry, and it's playing "Ferry Across the Bay." They're like, "Does Liverpool have anything else apart from this?" And I'm like, "What else does it need?" So yeah.
I think I was in Liverpool once, just for dinner with our distributors from England, but didn't see Penny Lane. Now I once went to, I guess I was going up to Straight Edge to Malden, but I had flown in with Paul Stevens, who's now, let's see, trying to remember who he's working for now. He was Trace Elliott for a while, but he was telling me about Marconi is based in the town where he's living. Yeah. What town is that now? Because I would love to go there sometime and see the Marconi factory and museum and all that.
Well, I'm sure Marconi was in Liverpool for a bit.
I love the history of, technology. That's fascinating too. So if I could spend the time of, my retirement going to museums and seeing stuff like that, because that just fascinates me. I kind of wanted to make an Eminence museum, but I haven't had the time to get around to it, and we don't really have enough stuff to keep many people interested. But we got something interesting happened a couple of years ago. We had a little concert locally to raise funds for something. It was like a cancer. Can't remember the name of the cancer, charity right now, but we were raising funds for that. Had a concert there in town, and the guy who owned the property where we had the concert came up in the middle of the concert and said he had something to present to me. And he had moved into the house in Eminence that the banker, when we first moved to town, lived in. And my dad had given the banker, I guess he got one of his first loans for him to start the company. He had given him the speaker that was our first speaker we ever built at Eminence. And he found it in the attic of his house. And it had written on the back of it, Eminence speaker number 1 or something. And my dad had signed it, and he presented it back to us. So we got that for our museum. That was pretty cool. It was a little beat up, but a piece of history just the same.
So you must have some cool stories, Rob, of like people, like musicians and artists that have been a bit wacky and crazy, and that you've had to work with and deal with.
A lot of these, the musicians are, if they're really well known, I'm shy around them. I don't. First of all, I don't want to be an annoying fan, So I don't do that. But all the artists that I've gotten to know, really friendly guys, and some of them that that you'd think are kind of outrageous from their reputations and stuff, are really just they're regular guys. When you get to talk to them privately, I remember I can't even remember who the artist was, but when I was at the NAMM show, what I used to do was go by and get our customers and take them out for a beer, at lunch or something, and kind of what we're doing now. And Gary Sunda from Randall was one of my favorite guys to go pick up. And so I went to this booth one time, and he's talking to this guy that looked like Cousin It from the Munsters, just hair like straight down over his face and everything. And I'm like, who was that guy? And he told me who it was, and I recognized the name, but some artist. And he said, he's just a regular guy. That's his shtick. That's his persona, but he's a regular guy.
Before we had this call, I mentioned to Dan something. Something we don't really generally talk about, but Dan and I, both our dads work in the industry, as does yours. My dad's a physicist.
Oh yeah,
as well. Partly the reason we started this whole podcast out was because both of us are quite passionate about acoustics, all elements of acoustics. We don't know much about lots of it, but we really find it interesting talking to people who know a lot about it, and that's why the focus is generally what the background is, because it's interesting that once you get into it, you think, God, that's a job, that's really interesting. I just think it's one of those things that I think more people would be interested in it if they knew it was a job that existed. And that's why a lot of them are failed musicians. You mentioned before, but I work in environmental acoustics. Nearly all of them are failed musicians, just because.
Really?
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. A bit like Dan.
Well, I'll
really.
tell you what, it's been a blessing to be able to work in a field that was interesting work and enjoyable work. I've really if I couldn't have picked a job. Maybe if I was going to be a professional golfer and I was good enough to do that and make a living at it, it would be better. But other than that, I can't really think of anything I would more rather do for making a living. And a lot of people don't have that luxury of being able to make a living doing what they love to do, and that's a real blessing.
Yeah.
That my parents, I guess I was fortunate to have been born into a family that had a speaker factory, so that I could have a free job there.
Yeah, it helps. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was funny. It was before when you were talking about like the anechoic chamber. One of my earliest memories is not my earliest memories, but I do have a memory, is that my mum used to palm I've got a twin sister, my twin sister, me, and my dad, and we'd go to the acoustic research unit in Liverpool University, and he'd stick us in the anechoic chamber, and sometimes I'd run out and switch the lights off and close the door and leave my sister in there. Which, if anyone's ever been in an anechoic chamber with the lights off, is
it's creepy, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It is.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
When I was working at Georgia Tech, we had a microwave anechoic chamber, which was really big, and it's just basically the same thing as an acoustic anechoic chamber, but the cones that they had in there were like filled with carbon or something that would absorb the microwave radiation in the same way that the cones physically absorbed sound. But it was also pretty effective acoustic anechoic chamber as well, just because it's full of cones and big ones. And we would work in there for hours at a time, and sometimes you just had to get out, because it starts to become annoying that you don't get any feedback, from reflections around you and everything. So your mind's thinking like something's not right here, I need a break.
It screws with you. Like, I remember doing like university projects, and you're in there for hours and hours and hours, and you come outside and hear a car go past, and it's like, whoa, what the hell was that? Like, it's just like, it's so quiet and there's no echo. It's just so unnatural that it's just crazy. And it was interesting, George, you mentioned about like our dads doing noise and stuff. And yeah, my dad was involved in more of the environmental noise side of things, and kind of did the like training just as I was doing it. So he was kind of copying me in a way. And I still persevered in like, through all the troubles and being associated with him, I was still able to break through and actually still be able to do what I do. So it was quite good.
I hope he listens to this, Dan.
I'll send him just that bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's interesting. Like, I think it's clearly rubbed off on you, Rob, that your dad was so passionate about sound, physics, acoustics, and it's created one of the leading companies in
It's
the
kind
field.
of funny that I don't think he was as passionate about sound as he was about production. It was kind of an accident that he got into sound. He always liked figuring out how to make things. And like when I built a house when I moved back to Kentucky, and he helped me, do a lot of construction. So it had redwood siding on it, and he literally made a machine that we could feed the siding through before we put it up to stain both sides of it and seal it real quick, like just as fast as you could spit them through there. It was coating them, and he made a machine. He'd do that kind of thing, as long as I can remember. He always was making something to make your job easier. And I guess
more an engineer than a physicist.
Yeah, he always said, lazy is the mother of invention. So if you want to do it easier, make some kind of tool or machine to make it easy for you.
Well, Rob, it's been great to catch up with you and dive into all of your stories and what you've been doing over the years, and really appreciate it. So thanks for coming on and having a chat.
It's been fun. Thank you all for having me.
Yeah, anytime.
Yeah, for those who are new here, feel free to subscribe and drop a comment below with any questions or suggestions for topics. That would be fantastic. But we will see you next time. Thanks so much.